intro to VMs. So if you currently don't have a Ubuntu VM, then we highly recommend that if you have either VirtualBox or VMware, you just set one up. And if you don't, then you can try to like just follow along. But if you don't have the ISO or the .ova file either, then it might take a little while to download. So we recommend you would start that as soon as possible. You should be able to find a link to the relevant downloads in the previous announcements in our Discord. Yeah, and as for a quick overview of what we're going to be doing today, we have, again, 4 sections, but hopefully you will be able to learn about just how to like edit files, configuration files, etc. inside of a command line interface. You're going to learn about how you can install packages, remove packages, what packages even are, as well as how to remotely connect to different Linux operating systems, or just really any system that uses SSH. And then to kind of like tie things together, we're going to be creating our own LAMP stack. If you don't know what that is, essentially, we're going to be making our own web servers to host our very own website. All right, and today we're going to start off with terminal text, how to use a command line text editor. So Justin, why don't you take it away?
Gotcha. Thank you, Gabe. So yeah, I'm going to be going over terminal text editors, pretty much what they are, how they're used, and also go do a brief overview of 2 of the most common ones, that being Nano and Vim. There's also other ones out there such as Emacs, but they aren't as popular nowadays, and the 2 biggest ones are Nano and Vim. So pretty much, what are terminal text editors? Essentially, they're extremely lightweight and pre-installed text editors that come with most Linux distributions. Here's a screenshot of like what the basic Nano is when you open it, and as well as Vim. So yeah, these pretty much just, it's essentially like almost Notepad within the terminal, so it doesn't come with a lot of the creature comforts that an IDE would come with, like spell check or stuff like that. But they can be used. Yeah, they're all, and also they have a variety of use cases. So a couple things to know. Like I mentioned before, they aren't IDEs, so a lot of the creature comforts that you might come to know from IDEs, these just won't have. Such as also, they lack full mouse support. So when you go into Nano or Vim, you can't select the line that you want to go to just by using the mouse. You have to use either the arrow keys in Nano, or Vim can also use H, J, K, and L to navigate, but you can also use the arrow keys in Vim. And in the case of Vim, it is also highly customizable with a .vimrc file that you can edit to your liking. So just a brief overview of Nano. Like I said before, Nano is very simple and easy to use. This is what it looks like when you will open a file in Nano. It just shows GNU Nano 5.4, the file name that you're editing, and then just pretty much prints out the file that you can edit. So yeah, like I mentioned before, also, you can use arrow keys to navigate. So yeah, just arrow keys to go up, down, left, and right. And you also have very basic commands, just hitting Control and another key for simple commands. So now, overview of Vim. So Vim is a lot more complex, but also a lot more powerful. So it has 2 basic modes: insert and normal. Normal is what you'll go into when you open a file, and you can just navigate and run different commands with it within Vim. But to actually edit text and go into insert mode, you have to hit the I key, and then you're able to edit within the file. And commands that you will do, you preface with the colon. So if you want to go into paste mode, you have to do colon and then set space paste. And we're going to go over this when I do an overview of these actually in a VM. And also, like I mentioned before, Vim is highly customizable. So like I said before, there is a .vimrc file in your home directory on Linux, and you can get a bunch of different actual plugins for Vim to make it function a lot more like one of the IDEs that so like Eclipse or IntelliJ, you can make it function a bit like that. Okay. So yeah, now I'm going to go into a example. Let me change screens really quick. Okay. So here I'm in an Ubuntu VM. I'll give you guys some time to get into this.
You're not sharing your screen.
Oh, I'm not? Now am I?
Yep.
Okay,
Thank
perfect. Thank you. So yeah, I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to get into this, get it launched up. And do you guys have any questions? I know that I kind of went a bit fast through this stuff. So if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat or feel free to unmute.
One question.
Mhm.
Why Vim?
I personally use Vim just because it's a lot more powerful and you can do a lot more with it. So there are like certain keybinds you can do to delete everything within a certain block. So you can do DI and then quotes to delete everything within quotes, or DI then parentheses to delete everything in parentheses. And it's just, you can do a lot more with it rather than just basic nano. And also for this, you shouldn't see a sign-in page when you follow the link. It should just take you to MyBar and then it automatically checks you in. Alejandro, yes, I would recommend to start with Nano, and as you get a bit more comfortable with just using terminal-based editors to, if you want to, you can switch to Vim, but there are a lot of people that, okay, Alex, there are a lot of people that still use Nano and they work just fine with it. But Vim will help a lot with some workflow if you're doing a lot of coding with it. Okay. So I'm gonna start with a pretty basic demonstration of nano. So I'm gonna do sudo nano /etc ssh underscore config, and we're gonna go over more in depth about editing SSH later. But just for now, I just want to show off this file to show off what nano does. So you run this, type in your sudo or user password, and then it brings you into this screen. And you can see at the bottom here, there's like for help, write out, exit, read file, and a bunch of different ones. So yeah, pretty much you just can edit around, move down with the arrow keys, go right, go up. Yep. And then whenever you want to edit something, say I just want to go down here, do, like say I just want to write like my favorite website, you know, no security blog. So yeah, then after you're done editing the file, you'll just hit Control+X. And then if you want to save it, you hit Y. And if you don't want to save it, you hit no. So if I want to save it, I hit Y. It'll ask you the name of the file. So if I want to change the file name to something else, like sshconfig.new, or if I wanted to create a new backup of it, then I could do it through here. And yeah. Thank you for the links in the chat, Alex. And then going over basic stuff with Vim. So one thing I actually learned is Ubuntu, it has Vim, but its alias is VI. So you can't, if you do sudo Vim, it says command not found. So you have to do sudo VI And then if we do the same sshs_config, it'll, oh yeah, I forgot I changed the name. Wait, what? Oh. So yeah, brought me back into the same file. And so, yeah, and for this, you can just use the arrow keys to move around. You can also use H, J, K, and L, but that is, even though a lot of Vim users do use that, I prefer to just use the arrow keys because it's a lot simpler and it's not just another thing to remember. So yeah, and now I want to go down to the end and I'm going to take out this because I don't want it in the SSH config, even though you guys should definitely check out this site. And then I'm going to go into insert mode. What the? What the heck is going on? Okay. So yeah, go back down to the end. Then I'm gonna go to the start of this, hit I to hit. Okay.
So when you do Vim on Ubuntu, like right off the bat, it's like the old version of Vim. So you might have to do like a sudo apt update or sudo apt install Vim and then try it again.
Okay.
It could be really weird sometimes, but try that, see if it works.
Sudo apt update. Live troubleshooting now. All packages are up to date.
Install Vim. Like I know like
Okay, yeah.
you have it installed already, but yeah.
So now it should work. So yes, it now I hit I to go into insert mode. You can see it down here. And then I'll just delete this whole line and then hit escape to go back into normal mode. Then hit :WQ to write and then quit. That's pretty much a basic overview of Vim. Later on, I'm going to link a Vim cheat sheet to get more familiar with the commands. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Gabe to go over Linux packages.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to be going over Linux packages specifically for Ubuntu. And one of the first things I do want to point out is that the way that you interact with packages in your repositories, which we'll cover in a moment, will vary depending on which Linux distribution you use. And for our demonstrations and our purposes, we're going to just use Ubuntu because it's the most popular and you'll most likely be using it. But yeah, so with that out of the way, what are packages? Packages are pretty much just software. You can think of it as just software that you can download, whether that's a program, a utility, anything like that. And yes, you can install packages on a Linux distribution through GUI if it has one. However, I would usually recommend people to learn how to do it through command line, just in case you ever are on a Linux distribution that doesn't have a GUI. Just in general, for pretty much anything that you're doing on a Linux environment, I would recommend that you learn how to do from the command line interface if possible. And that's just because when it comes to different Linux distributions among pretty much any company, you're going to encounter a lot of variation, whether that be Ubuntu, for example, that has a very nice GUI, or you might be running like Slack Linux, or you might be running some version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So it can all vary, but if you know how to do it from command line, you'll have a good sense of what you're supposed to do, no matter what it is. And the package manager is essentially the tool or the utility you can use from the command line that allows you to download, install, and remove packages on your Linux system. The package manager for Ubuntu is called Apt. If you are using an older version of Ubuntu, such as Ubuntu 12.04, it used to be called apt-get, but since I believe Ubuntu 14, it may be 16, it's been since replaced with Apt, which is a newer version that has been updated over the years. And the first command we're going to be going over today is apt update. It's a very simple command, but it's a little counterintuitive. It doesn't actually update your packages. It doesn't update your software. What it does is it updates the list of software that apt can either install. And it also updates with the newest version of those softwares, so that if you have an older version, it can say, oh, that's old, so I'll get the new one when I install it. And when you run apt update, what it's basically telling the system to do is to refresh that list, get any new versions or new software if possible. Apt upgrade is the actual command or the apt function that will allow you to get updates and push them to your system's software. So you can use these in combination. I really like to do it with one command using the double and signs or and symbols, and we'll show you how to do that. But it's just one of those tips and tricks that I was talking about from the Tuesday meeting. If you want to get new software, what you can do is run the command apt install, and then you put whatever package you would like to install after that, and then it will install that software. Really simple. The opposite of that, if you want to remove, you have two real options, which is auto remove and purge. When it comes to auto remove and purge, they do very different things, but more often than not, you want to actually use them together. And we'll show you how to do that. But the main difference between auto remove and purge is that purge will try to delete the package that you want, as well as any dependencies that came with that package. And what a dependency is basically extra software or libraries that come along with packages because they use those functionalities, but it's not actually part of the package itself. It's some third-party thing. That's the way you can think of a dependency. Hence, the package is dependent on the dependency. That's another way of putting it. And sometimes those dependencies are used by other packages on your computer. So when you use purge, it's going to remove the package, and then it's going to also remove any configurations. So like settings or configuration files or remnants of those things. Like if it made a directory, or for example, it would try to remove that. Auto remove will get rid of those dependencies. So if you use them together, so you would use purge and auto remove in one command, what it will do, what your system will do, is delete the package, delete the configurations for the package, and any dependencies that are no longer used anywhere else because the package is gone will also be removed. And that's just pretty much to save space, because if you install a bunch of programs and remove a bunch of them, but you keep all their dependencies, you'll slowly be creeping up on your maximum hard drive size. So You just want to make sure that you remove dependencies when they're no longer being used. And that's, again, done with auto remove. Now, when it comes to actually configuring or messing around with apt, I'll show you that right after this demonstration of like actually using apt. So I'm going to switch my screen share to my VM. Right, you guys should be able to see my VM here. Is that right?
Yep.
Right. So the first thing we're going to do is just use sudo apt update. So because apt is managing your packages, and packages are stuff that are going to be, incorporated into your system, it has to actually be like certain things have to be like compiled and stuff like that in order to run. You're going to have to use sudo whenever you're dealing with a package manager. It's just something that requires administrator level privileges. So we're going to do sudo apt update. It's going to ask me for my password, and then it's going to run. It's going to have a whole bunch of this output, but don't worry, it's not errors, it's not glitches, it's intentional. We'll cover what these links and stuff are in just a second. And then, it's done basically when you see this kind of output. And it tells me how many packages on my system that can be upgraded, which remember means that there is some kind of update or newer version. If I run this command, I'd be able to see which ones those are, but for now, that's not too important to me. If you wanted to, for example, just update all, or I should say upgrade all of the packages on your system, a really neat trick is sudo apt update and then sudo apt upgrade. So just as a refresher for those of you who came to our Tuesday meeting, the double and symbol here means that it's going to run this upgrade command if this update succeeded. So basically saying, if getting the new list of software works out, like it succeeds, then I'll try to upgrade using that list. And that's pretty much a really simple one-liner that you can do. If I were to run this, I'm not sure if it'll actually install anything since this is a fairly new VM. Looks like it is. So whenever you are installing, whether it's for an update or it's brand new software, it's going to basically come with this prompt saying, are you sure you want to? I'm going to say yes in this case. And it's going to go through that process. As you can see here, it has like a little progress bar that's going. Once this is done, then I'll be able to have my shell again. So it's going to keep going. But in the meantime, what I'll talk about is another really awesome flag that you can use, which is just tac-y. If you do sudo apt and then either install or upgrade, you can use tac-y, which is an option that basically just automatically says yes. So remember when I got that prompt saying, are you sure you want to install? Just add the tac-y and it'll do it automatically. So if you realize that you are going to be installing either a lot of packages or you're going to be running over and over again, just add that tac-y and you'll save that 1 second of having to type in the y. It also just means that it's autonomous. So if you use it in a script or something like that, it won't be prompting you for user input, which is what I found the tac-y option to be really great in, which is updating or installing something with a script. Again, it's going to require sudo privileges, so you can't just do that to avoid sudo permissions or having to authenticate. It's not going to do that for you. But yeah, this is taking a little while, so I'm just going to quit out of this or cancel this process. And in order to do that, I'm just going to do Control-C. And it's going to kill it. Yeah, so it is now dead. And yeah, sometimes that can just take a long time. But that's just because I have so much stuff. But in order, if you want to install something individually, let's try SL. Let's see if it will let me. It will not. Okay. I will see if this works. Okay, I'm gonna let this finish actually. And once that's done, I'll go over the install and other stuff. In the meantime, while that's going, what I'll do is I'll just cover the rest of the content on the slide. So we have /apt/etc/apt. This is the Ubuntu default location to configure apt. So one of the most important files here is sources.list. And this is going to contain the list of repositories that your system is going to be looking to download the packages from. You can set these to whatever you want. By default, it comes with the default Ubuntu repositories. But say, for example, you're working in a company that has its own private repository of packages, for example, for either proprietary software or just custom software in general, you could put your repository in sources.list and it will pull that server for it. And there are other files in there which can configure things such as automatically downloading software updates, automatically applying security updates, a whole bunch of other stuff. Those are not the most important things because you could just Google how to do that if you want to for a little bit of automation. The most important thing, though, is definitely the repository list because that's going to control where you're getting your stuff from. And obviously, when you're using a default image like I am here, you don't have to worry about your repositories being broken, but sometimes over time, you might either have a old version of a now, deprecated operating system such as CentOS. Over time, the repositories that it's pointing to are going to be deprecated, so it won't work anymore. You might need to have a either newer or a backup repository that will handle that for you. Sometimes they'll have a separate repository for legacy software. So if you want to use legacy software, you might need to edit your repository list. So that's why I'm bringing it up here. When it comes to Linux systems, you never know which version you're going to get. So it's just something that's nice to know. And these two websites here, packages.ubuntu.com and repogen.simplylinux.ch, are good websites that you can use to kind of create or generate repository configurations that you can just plop into your sources.list, and it'll allow you to pull that thing or that repository. And I'll show you guys what that looks like right now, now that my grade is done. Okay. I should be able to see my screen here. And now when I do sudo apps, actually I'll go to, I'm already here in this case, but you would use cd/etc/apt. And just as a refresher, remember that CD stands for change directory, and this will allow you to go to any location on your file system as long as you have permission to do it. In this case, like I said, the directory we want to be going to in order to edit or just view our configurations is /etc/apt. This leading / is saying that we're going to be defining this file path from the root directory. So we're saying from the root directory, the highest point in our file system, the very beginning of our file system, try to go to a folder or a directory that's named etc. From there, try to go to a folder or directory called apt. And when we run this command, we are here. It's not going to do anything. No. Okay. I don't know why that was yelling at me, but whatever. So now that we're in etc apt, and by the way, please let me know in the chat or by unmuting yourself if I'm going too fast or you want me to cover something. I'll be happy to help. But yeah, now that we're here, if I run ls, which basically just lists all of the contents of this directory, if you're used to using cmd, on Windows, then it would be the equivalent of dir. So when I use ls, I can see that I have some directories here, apt-conf.d, preferences.d, and stuff. But I have this file here called sources.list. I'm going to use Vim, what Justin just went over, to open this file. I'm going to enter in the file name. I forgot that I don't have Vim because it's VI right now. So I will use that instead. And this is what the sources.list file looks like. As you can see, it roughly just contains these lines, which, because Ubuntu is, you can think of it as the successor to Debian. It's a branch of Debian. It's also going to have similar repositories, in this case, the deb repository. And then it's going to have a link to wherever it might be hosting that. And then these key terms are basically where it's going to be from. So like restricted software or third-party software or whatever else it may be. As you can see, it kind of changes the key terms depending on the particular kind of packages that it's going to be trying to download. And that's why I highly recommend using the packages.ubuntu.com or the repogen.simplylinux.ch websites, because it will determine which key terms to use depending on what you want to be getting. So it does that for you. It can translate that for you. And if you wanted to add a new repository, it's very simple. You would just put it at the next available line. When it comes to standard practice, obviously, you would want to put some kind of documentation or a comment basically saying where it's going to be getting it from or why you're adding that repository. So you might just have a quick comment saying like, this is for company software or something. And then you would put like your link there, right? But yeah, that's pretty much what that's for. And by the way, comments can vary depending on the file. If you don't know what a comment is, it's basically a line inside of a file that the computer, the system, the service does not read. It just is in the file for humans to look at. That's all it's there for. It's not going to do anything. It's just there for humans to look at. And you can use this to like leave notes for yourself, documentation, etc. In this file, comments are going to be with a hashtag or shift 3, the pound symbol, whatever you call it. But like I said, it can vary depending on the particular file. But yeah, that's pretty much the sources.list file. It's going to let me exit. No, let me exit. Okay, but that's basically how you do that. And if I try to install something now, will it let me? It will. Okay, and that's really simple, just how you install something, just sudo apt install, and then the package name. Fun fact, you can actually input multiple. So I could put like open SSH tag server, and then, I don't know, some random other package, right? And you can actually just keep chaining them together, separated by a space, and that way it'll allow you to download all of them all at once. And just like that, we've installed 2 packages this time instead of just 1. So you don't actually have to install each package individually, because that would take way too long. So if you just have a list of packages you're trying to install, you can do it like that. Similarly, if you want to remove multiple packages, you can just keep chaining them. So for example, that last package that I installed, Oneko, let's try removing that. So I would do sudo apt purge tac auto remove. I want to note here that this dash right here in the middle of auto remove is part of the name. It's not actually like a separate option or anything. There's no space that's missing. It's supposed to be there. It's just part of the name. And then I will do Oneko. And then it's going to ask me, are you sure you want to delete that? And then it's going to say, okay, these dependencies are no longer needed if we remove it. I'm going to click yes. One thing to note, these packages that are like the dependencies, sometimes when it's removing the dependencies, it's removing just a part of them. So, sometimes when you're removing a package, it might say removing like Ubuntu desktop. It's not actually going to remove your desktop, although it very might could, depending on what you're removing. But sometimes it's just saying there because there's a part of the Ubuntu desktop dependency or library that it is removing, but the name is just still Ubuntu desktop, for example. And like I said, that's just an example. It might be different depending on your Linux distribution as well as the package you're removing. But yeah, so that's how you delete a package. Remember, this purge is saying to delete the package itself as well as configurations. The tac auto remove here is saying to, in addition to that, also remove dependencies. If we were to replace these with each other or swap them around and say auto remove tac purge, this is another valid command, but what this is saying is instead to remove all unnecessary dependencies from the system and then purge them. So to delete them and then any configuration files that are associated with those dependencies. Now, although this is a valid command, and it might be useful if you're trying to just remove all dependencies, chances are your intention is to delete a package, not just delete dependencies. So you'll be most likely sticking with the purge tac auto remove variation instead. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, because sometimes you might run into different websites telling you one thing. But yeah, this way is to delete packages and all of their unnecessary and associated dependencies, as well as configuration files. And I think that covers everything for the basics of apt. Again, this is just to help you install packages, whatever you might need. So say, for example, you are trying to, I don't know, do some kind of project and you realize you need to install something for your project, then you would use apt. And if you realize you no longer need it, you can remove it. Or you realize you might have something that's like considered malware, you can use purge auto remove to delete. But yeah, I think that covers that much. We're going to be going over to SSH, and I'll pass it back over to Justin for that.
Thank you, Gabe. Screen share working good?
Yep.
Okay. So yeah, I'm going to be going over the securing shell section. This is pretty much just going over SSH. So what it is, possible use cases, and then for a demonstration, we're going to set up SSH with a more secure config. So to start off, what is SSH? So it essentially just stands for secure shell. So the first S being secure, the SH being shell, like what we talked about in the Tuesday meeting. And pretty much what this is a cryptographic protocol that when you connect to a server using SSH, it will encrypt all traffic. So it's a lot more secure than just using something like RDP, remote desktop. Yep. And so it has also many different use cases, which we're also going to go into. One of them is, like I said, to securely connect to remote machines, whether it be to, you want to do some system management from outside of the, if you're, say, working from home, which a lot of people are, and you need to connect to a work computer, oftentimes you'll just use SSH to connect to the remote machine, so you're able to do management software on it. And also, you can transfer files using the SSH protocol with a command called SCP. And the syntax for that is doing SCP. I believe it's the destination that you want to copy the file from, and then where you want to copy it to on your computer. And you can also do it to transfer files from an outside computer onto the server running SSH. It also does have a lot of other use cases too. So I know for a lot of things like Hack the Box and Try Hack Me, which are different penetration testing platforms, which we'll go into later on in the semester. You have to use a VPN connection to be able to SSH into the different boxes and even connect to them. Yeah. So now just going to go over some basic SSH security do's and don'ts. So one thing that you want to have is key pair authentication as opposed to password authentication. So you can run a command called SSH keygen, which will generate a pair of keys, one being their private key and one being a public key. The private key is stored on the server or on the machine that is running the SSH server, and there's a file called authorized host, which you will paste a public key into to be able to connect to that. Another do, which we'll go over in the demo, is to check for idle SSH sessions. So essentially what this will do is the SSH server will talk to the SSH client to ask, oh, is this person still on it every X amount of time that you set? And if it's not, and it fails a certain amount of times, it'll just completely kill the SSH connection. Another thing that you shouldn't have with SSH is being able to connect with the root account. So like Gabe talked about in the Tuesday meeting, the root account has the highest privileges on the machine. Can do anything without being prompted for. It's essentially just the full admin user on a Linux machine. So you would not want someone to be able to connect with SSH because oftentimes root passwords on Linux machines are just default and a lot of people won't change them. And also you don't want someone to be able to gain persistence, which is something we'll talk about later, using the root account, just being able to connect through SSH. And another thing you should do is to allow certain users. So say you only want one user to be able to SSH into a certain machine, you can just say, which I'll go into in the demo, allow users and then the username to allow those users. And on the other part of this, there's also deny users. So say if you don't want someone to be able to connect to a server using SSH, you can just deny that user from accessing the SSH server. And another thing is empty passwords. So sometimes when you create a new user in Linux, it won't generate a password and you have to set that password. And sometimes people might just forget to set a password. So you might be able to just use SSH to connect to that user without a password, and it just automatically will connect you. So now I'm going to go over a brief overview of doing a more secure SSH configuration. So yeah, back into Linux VM. My screen looking good? Yep.
Looking good.
Okay, thank you, Alex.
The stream is fine too.
Okay. Thank you. So yeah, so we're gonna change first. If you guys haven't done this yet, you have to sudo apt install open SSH or open SSH -server. And I already have this installed, but what this will do is just install the open SSH server package. So yeah, you go through, put in your user password. Since I already have it installed, it's just gonna say that it's already installed pretty much. And then what we're gonna do is we're going to use sudo systemctl status SSH. So what this command does is will show if SSH is running. So right now it's not running, being that this is just a white dot. If it's running, it'll be green. And here it also says, but it's loaded, but also inactive. So pretty much what this does is it's sudo system control checking the status of the service called SSH. System control is what you'll use to managed services on Linux. Yeah. So after you guys install that, we're gonna cd into /etc/ssh. Then I'm going to do ls to list all the files in this directory. So you can see that there's one called sshconfig and also one called sshgconfig. We want to make sure that for this, we're going to be editing the sshgconfig because the sshconfig is just for the host. The sshgconfig is also for is just for the server. Also, another thing I just remembered, make sure to run sudo systemctl stop ssh. So when we're editing the files, we can just start it back up after we're done editing our config. So yep, just sudo systemctl stop ssh. Shows nothing for me because it was already stopped, but it might show something for you guys. So now I'm just going to use so sudo nano sshd_config. I'm just going to use nano for this because it's a lot simpler to use than Vim. So the first thing we want to do is the client alive interval. So we're going to go down to the bottom of the file. So go down to the bottom of the file. We're just going to add in something called client alive interval 360 and client alive count max 0. So essentially what this will do is every 360 seconds, it's going to ask, the SSH server is going to ask the SSH client, hey, are you still here? Are you still working? And if it fails, it is just going to kill the SSH test. And you can change this so to either something like 1. So at every 6 minutes, it's going to ask. And if it fails, it'll allow it to fail once. But if it fails again, it's just going to kill the session. So for the next thing, we're going to do permit empty passwords. There should already be a setting for this, I believe. Yes, right here. So permit empty password. So it's going to be commented out. So if you just delete the hashtag or # before it, whatever you want to call it, it's just going to allow you to, now this is going to actually work. So what this does, like I said before, if a user doesn't have a password, they won't be able to, no one will be able to connect to it through SSH. Once again, this is good because not all users will come with passwords by default on Linux. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is allow users. So once again, go into the bottom. We're just going to do, so allow users. I just want myself to be able to access their SSH and then deny users. So say if I don't want Gabe to access my SSH server, I can just say deny users Gabe. And yeah, so the next thing, making sure the root user can't log in through SSH. So once again, up here, we have a permit root login. We're just going to change this to no. So the root user cannot log in through SSH. Okay. Next thing, also once again, going down to the bottom of the file, we're going to add in something protocol. Also, if I am going too fast, just let me know in the chat. So yeah, we add protocol 2 because it's the more up-to-date for pretty much version of the SSH protocol. It's a lot more secure and than protocol 1. Oh, also. So why do we use, Alex asked, why do we block the root user from logging in? Essentially, you just don't want the user with the highest privileges to be able to just straight up connect. If it has a weak password, then if someone just password sprays or uses a brute force technique to get in with the root user, then it's really bad for your server. And then one thing that you can also change is password authentication to no. For this case, I'm just going to leave it because we aren't really going over creating our own key pair to have SSH be extremely secure, because that would just be kind of out of the scope of this lecture. So we're just going to leave this as is for now. And then if you guys are in Nano like I am, you'll just hit Control X, save modified buffer, yes, then just hit enter to save it as the normal user or normal file name. And also, if you guys didn't run Nano without sudo, you're gonna have to go back in and run it with sudo, because if we look at the file privileges for the SSH config, no user except root is able to write to the file. So you need to be acting or using, pretty much editing it as root. So now if we do back to sudo system control start SSH, it's just gonna return nothing. So, but now if we check the status of the SSH server, SSH service. See, now it says it's active, running, and it's loaded. So we have this green dot next to it. Then once again, if we check that it is running, because SSH also runs just on port 22, you can also change that, but just for this case, we just have it running on port 22. We can see right here, it's listening on our local computer just on port 22. So yeah, that's pretty much going pretty basic into securing SSH. There's a lot more you can do with it, such as using different software to secure it. But for this case, this is just pretty much a basic overview of it and how to secure it. So now I'm going to give it back to Gabe.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to share my screen for the last segment. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see my screen. Okay, so we're going to be talking about LAMP. As I said earlier, LAMP or a LAMP stack is basically a very common, very simple way of creating a web server with a website. And the benefits of learning how to use or create a LAMP stack is basically you get very comfortable in using Linux very quickly, as well as being able to kind of experiment or just test things out with different services, configurations and stuff. And once you become more comfortable with that, you can kind of use those skills, use that knowledge and that experience to help you with other things that you might not be so comfortable with. So we're going to be covering LAMP for that reason. What is LAMP? Well, first of all, it stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. That's what the LAMP stands for. You might see a couple different variations of a LAMP stack. So you might see something called a LEMP stack or a, well, I guess WAMP doesn't really count since that's Windows. But basically what a LEMP stack is it uses a different web server. Instead of Apache, you would be using Nginx. We're going to cover Apache because it's just a little bit easier to use and it's more popular when it comes to these kinds of stacks. But Nginx is also perfectly fine. It's just that LAMP is like the big one, the most common one. And a LAMP stack, as I said, is a basic software stack to host a website. Once we set up the basic stack itself, we will need to use a CMS, which stands for Content Management System, in order to create our website. But the CMS is really easy. we're going to be using WordPress today, but other examples of CMSs you might be more familiar with would be Squarespace or Wix. Those are also content management systems. They allow you to do everything from the web, and they also usually offer some kind of hosting, which is why you can do everything from the web. WordPress, we're going to do it with a local installation so that we won't have to like sign up for any accounts or anything like that. But yeah, another benefit of a LAMP stack is that it's very highly customizable. It's very flexible, and you have full control over the environment instead of having to have it on some third-party hosting site. Sometimes that might be what you want, but when you're learning about how these things work and you're getting more comfortable, it's better to have that full control where you actually can analyze what everything's doing and getting used to that troubleshooting process. So I'm going to cover that in a technical demo. So if you have your VMs ready, then please try to follow along. And without further ado, I will share my screen. Hopefully you guys can see my VM. We're gonna start off simple. The first thing we're going to do is just download everything that we need, all right? So the first step we're going to do is handling the packages. So we're gonna type in sudo apt install lamp tax server, and then the caret symbol. If you don't know what the caret symbol is, you just press shift and then 6. Sometimes it's also called a hat. So we're going to run this command. I'll give you some time to kind of write that down or copy it down into your VMs. Let me know if you need the font of my terminal to be any bigger, or if it's blurry or something like that, so then I can increase the size of that. But yeah, we're just going to run this, and then it's going to ask me to type in my user, and then it's going to install that. I already actually have that installed on this VM, but basically, as we went through before, it's going to just go through the process of installing that. If it throws you any errors or something like that, you might need to run sudo apt update beforehand. You might need to do that, especially if you're using a fresh VM and you haven't run it yet. Otherwise, you should be good to go on that front. Okay. And now that we have that installed, those are going to be all the packages that we need for the Apache, the MySQL, and the PHP. So I'm going to kind of break down those individually here. So I'm going to use cd, again, to navigate to a different directory. I'm going to do /etc/Apache2. Okay. And when I run this command, it's going to take me to the configuration directory for Apache 2. And just in case you might have missed it when I was talking about it earlier, I believe I mentioned it on the Tuesday meeting, but the /etc directory is basically the main configuration directory. The way I like to remember is it stands for the everything config. But yeah, it's going to contain most of the configuration files and directories for all your different services, parts of the system, and stuff like that. So that's why we're frequently going to use /etc. So yeah, that's just a little tidbit of information. Now, when I use ls in this directory, it's going to show me what's in here, and I can see a couple different things. I have mods enabled available. I have sites enabled, conf available. Then I have a couple other files here. Apache2.conf, environment variables or envars, I have magic, and ports.conf. For this simple demonstration, the only thing we're really going to be worried about might be the Apache2.conf. there you go. What that was is just aliasing when I type in Vim, it's going to run VI, and I just did that because I want to not actually install Vim right now, just to save you guys some time. Not too important, but this is the configuration file for Apache. I will note it's called Apache 2 because it's like an updated version of Apache, but most people just call Apache 2 Apache, just in case you might be confused by that. I just want to make sure that nobody's, kind of lost on that part. But here's the configuration. Again, comments are in the # or hashtag symbol. That's what this file uses. Usually speaking, when you're like reading configuration files and stuff like that, and you have no idea what's going on, if you start seeing like blocks of text like this, whatever symbol is in front is probably the comment for that file. So that's just a little way to kind of quickly get used to reading different configuration files, even if you have never used it before, even if it's something that's completely, estranged to you. So the important part of Apache is basically that we have these kinds of settings like server root. We'll have other things here like basically everything that's not commented, everything without that hashtag symbol is a setting that's currently being run. If you see something that might look like a configuration, for example, the server root here, but it does have that hashtag there, that's basically saying that it is a default configuration. So server root being set to /Apache or /etc/Apache 2. This is like the default, but it's not actually going to be running it because it's already default. And if you want to change it, then you would have to change the value here as well as removing that comment. So the servers will actually read that line. Yeah. And I'm just going to scroll through here basically to kind of give you like a brief, visual of what this might look like. As you can see, there's a lot of like sections or things that look like they're referring to a particular group of configurations or maybe a particular file directory path, I should say. And I'm just going to cover what these mean in a brief sense. With the directory tag, if you've ever used HTML tagging, it's very similar where you're going to have these triangle brackets. And then the directory tag is basically saying, okay, these configurations that I'm about to say are relevant to this directory. In this case, it's just a /, which means it is the root directory. So we're going to be setting some configurations for the root directory in relation to this Apache web server. And it's basically going to say options. Not going to really explain what that is right now because it's basically out of scope as to the specific meaning of that. It's more important to just know follow symlinks is basically saying it will. If there's some kind of symbolic link, which is basically a shortcut, if there's a shortcut related to root, then it's okay to use. It's okay to follow that. It does not allow any other configuration file to override these settings. And if it requires anything beyond what we specify, just deny them. Don't let them request anything. And then this is the ending tag. This / here or this leading / is not referring to the root directory in this case. This is just part of syntax when it comes to tags, similar again to HTML, where it just means that it's the end of the tag, whereas this is the open. In this case here, we see that it's configuring user share /user /share. And in this case, it's configuring /var /www. And yeah, that's pretty much what this is. If you want to specify configurations for other directories, you pretty much just follow the syntax. You have the tag here, directory, you put whatever file path you want to be configuring. You can just like Google whichever configurations you might want or follow the precedent kind of set here. The root directory is pretty strict. As you can tell, it's not allowing override from anything else, and it's going to deny everything if any problems arise. But other ones are usually a little bit more lax the further down you go the file system. But that's what that looks like. The the default configuration should be okay for what we're doing here. If I need to change that later on, I will. But the next thing we're going to be talking about is the M in LAMP. The M stands for MySQL. It may also stand for MariaDB, but MariaDB is just a fork of MySQL. So it's functionally going to be pretty much the same. And when we installed the LAMP server package, or I should say group of packages, it installed MySQL. However, we want to run this command, MySQL secure installation. And what this is going to do is it's going to actually, you could think of it as reinstall, but it's basically going to reconfigure our MySQL package using some more secure settings than default. So for example, it's going to make us have a password for the user root. By default, there is no password. So, we could set it to whatever we want. I am going to need to actually run this with sudo first. This double exclamation point, remember, that means, or that is a symbol for the previous command. So this is really equated to this. As you can see, it even put it on the screen here, because my last command was this. When I say sudo, and then the last thing I ran is basically going to translate to sudo, and then the last command that I ran. Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, I need to run sudo with that because it's reconfiguring it. And then it's going to say, do I want to verify the password is secure? Obviously, you want to say yes, right? For the sake of demonstration, I'm going to put no just so it's a little bit faster. So I can just type in a really quick password. But if you're going to be doing this on production, for example, you definitely want to make sure it's doing that basic check. Is it a decent? Is it a worthy password? Remove anonymous users. You probably do want to remove anonymous users because you don't want random people connecting to your database, potentially doing bad things to it, or even just viewing contents that they shouldn't. So I'm going to say yes. Disallow login remotely. I would say 100% of the time you want to disallow root remotely. Now, obviously, people always say always or 100% is a strong term, but I've never encountered a situation where I needed to have a database that was secure and also needed root access remotely. So we're going to disallow that. Remove test database and access to it, yes. Reload privilege table so that all these are going to be in place, yes. And that's the basic security or basic secure installation for MySQL that comes along with it. Obviously, there's a lot more things we could do, but that's a little bit more of a MySQL demo than a LAMP demo. So that since we have those basic things out of the way, we're going to go over how to actually use MySQL. So you just type in MySQL tac u to specify which user you want to log in as. I might say I want to log in as root. And then just have the tac p flag to say, okay, I want to log in using a password. So now it's going to ask me, okay, do you know the password for that user? I'm going to type it in. It's going to say denied because I'm logging in as root and I don't have sudo. But when I do say that, it's going to let me log in. So that's, again, kind of what we were doing earlier with the MySQL secure installation. It's going to prevent you from insecurely using it in a very simple sense. So this is the MySQL command line interface. There are GUI implementations of MySQL or front ends that allow you to interact with a MySQL database through like a web client or something like that. We're just going to stick to CLI because let's pretend that's all we have. And let's say we have, let's just see what we have here. So the basic structure of MySQL commands, because it's going to have its own set of commands, is basically it's going to be case insensitive, so it doesn't matter if I type in show databases or show databases. Doesn't matter, right? It doesn't interpret that for the command portion, right? And it ends with a semicolon. Those are the two main things you have to remember, right? It's case insensitive, ends in a semicolon. After that, you're pretty much just typing in whatever you want in terms of, commands. You might need to Google what you want to do specifically, but a couple rule of thumb: show databases is what we just did. It'll show us the databases we have. Databases, you could think of it as the big thing that's going to contain all our data relevant to our particular project or particular section, right? And then if we want to, let's say, start working with a particular database, we say use, and then, I don't know, MySQL, for example. And then it's going to say database changed. If that happened, then it worked properly. Remember, again, we're having that ending semicolon. Now we are using the MySQL database. So the commands that would be relevant are known to be on that MySQL database specifically, as opposed to any other. So here we can run the command show tables. When we run the command show tables, it's basically going to show us all of the, tables or inside of this database. Hopefully that's kind of self-explanatory. And each one of these is a table of stuff. So say we have the user table, right? We want to see, what information we might have on the user. So one command you can use is describe, and then the name of the table. What that will do will basically, and I know it's kind of an ugly format, but it basically show you all of the fields names. So like we have a field that's named host, we have a field that's named user, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to show you the type of data it's storing. So whether that be like a string, a Boolean, a number, this particular type you don't really have to memorize. And then some other information about, what this table is basically containing. And this is useful to know simply the header names, because when you, actually pick out the pieces of information that's being stored inside of this table, you don't want to just say, oh, okay, I want to see everything, because that's a lot of information. You usually just want to see, a handful of fields at a time. For example, I could do select. And let's just go with star. Star is a symbol that means everything. It's called the wildcard character. So in this case, I'm saying select all from, and then I'm going to type in my table name here. So like user. And as you can see, it basically looks like gibberish because there's just so much data here, and it doesn't automatically format itself. So instead of saying everything, I'll just say I want to see user and host. And how you can specify individual things is you just type it in and separate multiple stuff with commas. Now you might be asking, okay, how come you use capitals here if it doesn't matter? And that's because when you're referring to a particular actual entity, like the name of something, then capitals do matter. The command portion of what you're typing in doesn't matter. The actual data or the name of something still does. So when I run this, as you can see, it returns a lot less information. It only returns the user field and host field and all the contents there. So, for example, we can see we have a root user and they are allowed on localhost. Localhost is just a key term used pretty much everywhere. And it's just basically means this computer, this local host. Yeah, so it's allowing us to connect, and that's why. So that's like some basic interactions with MySQL. And we're going to be using this to create a new database for our LAMP stack. So if you're following along, I'll type in the command here, create database. And we're going to call it WordPress just as an example. You could name it whatever you want in real live, but I'm just going to name it WordPress because it's going to be used by WordPress. So it's just easy to remember for me. That's why I'm naming it that. Remember to have that ending semicolon. And then if it says query OK, that means we created the database WordPress. So if I show databases, now we can see WordPress is now here. So that's another way of checking that we know that it works. And let's see, we can, right now, if I were to describe it, so actually, if I were to use WordPress, and then I were to show tables, you're going to see it's actually empty. And that's because we just created it, right? Later on, when WordPress finishes installing and it's set, goes under the setup phase, all of this will fill up automatically. So we don't actually have to handle too much of the database directly, but we do have to set it up for WordPress to do that. In order to do that, we need to say grant. And in this case, I'm just going to say all privileges, so it's a lot simpler. So grant all privileges. I believe it's on WordPress .star. And what this is saying is it's going to give all the privileges, so all permissions on WordPress.star. WordPress is the database name. Dot is saying that it's going to refer to a particular table. Star, again, a wildcard character. So it's saying all tables in WordPress, we're going to grant all privileges to. And if I were to put, like, for example, star.star here, it's going to say grant all privileges to all tables of all databases. That's not very secure. So we're not going to do that. We're just going to say just on the WordPress database. Two, and then I'm going to define a user here. And I'm just going to say WordPress user at localhost. Allowed to create user with grant. Okay, so I will create user first, actually, WordPress user at localhost. Identified by, I'll just call it password for now. Obviously, in real life, we want to put a more secure password, but just for the sake of demonstration, I'll do that. And what this is doing is saying to create a user in MySQL. This is not creating a user on your actual system. It's just in MySQL. And inside of this quotes is going to be the user name. So in this case, I call it WordPress user. Then we're going to put an @ symbol. And then inside of the next pair of quotes will be the host that we can connect from. In this case, we're saying the local host. We want them to be able to connect exclusively from this computer itself. These quotes are here mostly because it's standard practice, just because it makes it very, very easy to always know that it's explicitly this. MySQL won't get confused by anything. Sometimes it does, depending on what you type in. But if we put it in quotes, it won't get confused because it'll know this section is the username, this section is the host. Then when we put identify by, this is basically saying we want them to have a password. And then inside of this last pair of quotes is going to be the password. Now that that works, I can use my up arrow keys so that I can run the commands that I had before. And now when I run this, it's going to say, okay, now that I actually have that user, WordPress at localhost, or WordPress user at localhost, I can actually grant them all the privileges to the database WordPress and all the tables on it. Before I leave, I'm going to flush privileges. What this is going to do is basically update the privilege table and basically make sure that our changes are now live. In order to quit MySQL, you can just type in quit, and we're actually done with MySQL. If you want to learn more about MySQL, there's plenty of resources on Google, but that's all we actually need to do in terms of MySQL for setting up our LAMP stack. Last thing we have to cover is PHP. But in terms of configurations, there's nothing we need to set up other than maybe security things. But for the sake of time, we're just not going to cover that. What we are going to cover, though, is getting WordPress. So the wget command, I'll actually use man for this. If you forgot, man is a command that allows you to read the documentation of another command. As you can see, wget is a non-interactive network downloader. Simply put, what that means is that wget allows you to download things from the internet, things from a web server. And what we can do is type in this link. And I will also put that in the Zoom chat just so that you can type it in. So that's the link. This is basically the link to the latest version of WordPress. I've memorized the link just because I've set up so many LAMP stacks in my time. But obviously, if you haven't memorized it, you don't have to. It's just something that I have done. And when I download it, or when I run the command, it'll download it. And when it says, in this case, I'm not the right user, so I tried to download it in the wrong place, right? So I'll actually go to my downloads directory, right? I'm in my downloads directory now. Remember, the tilde is a symbol referring to my user's home directory. So this is just an abbreviation of saying /home/user. Now, when I run wget, it works. When it says like 100% there, that's how you know it worked. And if I use ls here, I have it here. Now, this is a compressed file, right? It has everything we need, but it's compressed. So we need to uncompress it. So I believe the command is tar tac xzf. And then so tar tac xzf. I can't remember what the Z stands for, to be honest, but X stands for extract. F is create a folder for it, I believe. And the Z, like I said, I can't remember off the top of my head, but this is the command I usually run to handle tar.gzs, and it will uncompress it. And now I have this directory here. So if I go inside using cd, I use ls, I can see, okay, here is all of the configuration files, the PHP files that are going to be used for this WordPress website. The standard practice for websites, for at least for Ubuntu systems, is to put them inside of this directory here, var www.html. So I'm going to move mv, we covered this on Tuesday. Basically, it's going to just take our directory or a file and put it somewhere else in a file system. We're going to move dot is a symbol referring to this directory. So I'm going to move this. Actually, this doesn't work because I'm inside the directory. So I'm going to go back one. So cd dot in case we haven't covered it, just in case. Cd dot means go back one directory in the file system. So I used to be in my home directory is downloads WordPress. I use cd dot. I leave the WordPress folder and I just go back to downloads. So I'm going to mv WordPress 2/var/www/html. It's going to say permission is denied because I'm not a sudo user. So I'm going to use sudo, and then it works. When I actually go there, use ls, I can see, it's here. So cd WordPress, I can see that I have all this stuff. The important file that we're going to need to edit is WordPress config or WP config. As you can see, we have a sample here. So we're going to use cp WordPress config sample.php, and we're going to copy it to another file just called WordPress config.php. And now we have WordPress config.php right here. If you're thinking like, oh, how come I can't just rename the sample to what we're using? It's not considered good practice. It can actually sometimes throw errors as well. sometimes the WordPress installation is looking for both WordPress config for your live configurations, but it's also looking for the sample configuration file as well. That's just something I've run into personally. So I used to use CP to copy it. And then we're going to edit this config file. So WordPress config.php. Don't forget that it ends with the .php. And we're going to find this first field here where it says DB user. And actually, can I write to this? I can. OK. I'm going to switch to Nano for the sake of this demonstration, just in case you're using Nano. Just so that everybody gets some love. So DB name here, we're going to put our database name, WordPress, DB user, the name of our user, WordPress user, and then the password for that user. And in my case, it was password. In your case, it might not be. So you put whoever your password actually was, the thing that we put after the identified by, you put that here. As you can tell, these are plain text credentials and they are stored, in a pretty predictable location. So if you're to be doing this in a production environment, make sure that, your password is very secure, but also make sure that, your password isn't being reused somewhere else. Otherwise, an attacker might steal it and try it somewhere else. That's just something to note, especially if you're doing like security competitions such as Hivestorm or CCDC. That's something you might want to check out for if you're attacking boxes on CPTC or in other pen testing competitions. But yeah, if you're just in a business environment or a production environment, those are also just good practices. You don't want to be reusing passwords. And then in order to exit, I'm just going to, save it. Now that's all set up, right? The next thing that we have to do is make sure that this directory has the proper permissions. So we're going to use these following commands: sudo chown www tac data :www tac data WordPress. What this command does is it's going to make this. Actually, I should also include the tacr. So in this case, all I did was I ran the same command, but I added the tacr. This tacr is saying recursive. So what it did is it's basically going to change the owner and group owner to www data, www data. This is the default Ubuntu user that is used to host web services, stuff that would be on a web server. And that's basically why that's there. In order for these services to run, they expect the user to be www data. They also expect a certain level of permissions. So if we go to WordPress, what I can do here is use chmod. 755 should throw the least amount of errors. So I'll just do that. I need sudo. And yeah, ls tacl, in case we haven't covered it yet, the tacl is basically going to list all the files that are inside of this directory and put it in long list format. Part of long list format is going to show us the permissions here. And these permissions are basically defining the level of access that different users might have. As you can see, there's kind of three groups here: RWX, RWX, RWX. That is basically going to be saying the owner has these permissions. In this case, it has the ability to read the file, to write to the file, and to execute whatever might be there, right? So in this case, it's having all the permissions. This next group of RWX is going to be for the group owner of the file, because every owner belongs to both a user and a group. In this case, it has read and execute permissions. So anyone that's inside of the www data group would be able to read and execute but they would not be able to actually edit the file. They would not be able to write. And the last group of 3 here is for other users. Basically, if they're not the user, they're not in the group that owns this file or directory. If they're not in either of those 2 categories, this is how those people, those other people, should be able to treat this file. In this case, they would be able to read and also execute. If we were to take away their ability to read and execute, then the other users would be able to do nothing with the file. Simply see that it exists. That's about it. They would not be able to see the contents. They would not be able to edit the contents. They will not be able to execute whatever the contents may be. And that's just a brief overview of permissions in Linux. And now that we have that here, this should be just about fully set up. Now I'm going to check if, I think Firefox should come by default, if I can connect to our local host here. And I'm going to type in localhost. And yeah, so if you see this web page, this is basically saying that your web server is running and it works with the default page, right? This is what I want to see, right? However, this is not our WordPress installation. I believe if I do this, will it load? Yes. So if I do that, it will load because remember, when I said that the default location for your WordPress or just any web services or server or contents in general would be in HTML. That's because by default, web servers are going to point to this directory and say, we want to host those contents, right? In this case, since var www HTML is the place that it's hosting, I need to specify I want to go to the WordPress contents by adding this WordPress part. If I edit my Apache configuration file, and just as a reminder, that's in Apache2/etsy/Apache2/Apache2.com. I could change that. And let's look for var www HTML. It's not here. If I check sites available, should be here. Yeah, okay. So if I wanted to change the place that my web server is hosting, then I would go into Etsy Apache 2 sites available. Sites available is basically the directory containing the configuration files for all the individual sites you may be hosting. And then the name of whatever conf file for the server or the website that I'm hosting. In this case, the document root is the line that I wanted to be editing. And I could just put /WordPress here. And then if I save that, and then I'm going to run the systemctl restart Apache 2. Pretty much the same story that Justin went over. It's just going to restart the service. Now, if I do localhost, okay, I need to actually probably remove. Oh, this should work. Is that going to? Yeah, okay. It should work. I'm going to remove index.html first. Yeah, okay. But because index.html was there, I'll actually show you why it was loading that one first. So I will go back here in this file. Okay, it was in the other file. It was in Apache2.conf, then I believe. Not in this one. Okay. It might be in. in. That's weird. It should have been in. Weird. Okay, I don't know why it's not here. But the important thing is basically there is a configuration file, one of them. And that configuration file basically specifies which web page it should load first. And by default, index.html is at the very front of that line. So it's going to load that file first every single time. And since we had an index.html file, it was trying to load that one first. By default, I think index.php is at the very end, and index.php is actually what WordPress uses. So that's why by removing that .html file, it searched for the next best thing, which was index.php, which is what our WordPress uses. This is the basic installation for WordPress. Pretty self-explanatory. We just click, we want to install, we want to name it, whatever thing we want, like Swift. Our username will be, I don't know, Gabriel. The password will be so secure, so very secure. You have to have an email here, but it doesn't have to be a real email. So I can just use like that, for example. This button doesn't really matter. It's basically saying, like, do you want search engines like Google or whatever to, prefer this site or index it when people are searching? Doesn't really matter because the search engine could just decline your requests or whatever. So that's just kind of something that's up to you if you want to actually use it or not. Once you've actually done that, you can, sign into your website, and just like that, we have our lovely website. If I go to localhost, you can see we have a website. If you were to have done this on a, not just a VM, if you were to do this on, say, for example, something that has a public facing IP, whether that be like a cloud VM or just, an actual physical computer, or maybe a VM that actually has, a public IP that can be connected to from the outside internet, then, you would be able to access this website, albeit with a couple configuration changes, because, for example, we're connecting to it with localhost instead of an actual domain that you might normally see. But that's just pretty much, a couple steps away. But yeah, if you've been following along, you should actually be able to have your very own website right now. To kind of show you some basic things you can kind of do with WordPress, you can create posts, add new posts. You can start writing stuff like, I don't know, Swift. Swift is cool. Publish. Yeah, I want to publish it. When I go here, I have a new post. And I can go to it and I can read it. I can leave a comment, whatever I want. And just as promised, if I go to MySQL, I'm going to use the reverse search feature that I was talking about. And let's see, that failed. Okay. I'll try sudo MySQL. It's going to let me. It's not going to let me. I'm lucky. Okay, yeah, there we go. So when I'm using reverse search, I can kind of just type in the parts of the command that I remember, and then it's going to auto-complete with commands that I've run in the past that match that, right? So this is just an example of that, right? And when it's something that I want, all I have to do is press escape, or I could just press enter. But if I press escape, it basically leaves reverse search, and then I can just run it. I'll type in my password, and if I use WordPress and I show tables, everything's already been filled in here automatically. Remember when we made that WordPress user and we gave it the permissions, the privileges? Basically what it did is says, okay, WordPress, when it wants to create stuff here, let it. When it wants to edit stuff here, let it. And if we go to like select WordPress user from I think it's just called the username actually. It's not okay. Describe WordPress users. It's called user login. Okay. So if I user login, right, I can see like, hey, the user that I made, that information is being stored here, right? Now, for those of you who are more inclined for like an actual production or business environment, chances are you're not going to be using, databases too much at this point because all of it's going to be handled by WordPress. You might want to make privileges a little bit more narrow or restricted if you want to, because it doesn't need every single privilege, but that's kind of optional. If you're in a competition mindset, for example, if you're in CPTC or CCDC or Hivestorm, you want to make sure that your MySQL is secured to the point where other people can't be accessing your information or editing your information without your consent. But yeah, one thing that some of you may have on your mind is like the format earlier when I said like grant all blah 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 on like WordPress.star, and that's basically referring to all the tables in WordPress database. You can actually use this format for other things. For example, I could say select for user login from WordPress.wp users, and it'll also work. So if I'm not using that current database, I could use this format to basically, you could think of it as like almost like an absolute file path, but for databases, or just a file path in general. But I could say like select user from MySQL dot users. There we go. The table was called user. So I could use this command so that I can check which users I have on this system at any time from anywhere. It's just another neat trick you can use when using MySQL. And like I said earlier, MariaDB is pretty much just MySQL with a couple extra features and changes. So all of these things would still apply in case you're using that as well. But yeah, that's pretty much how you can make your very own LAMP stack. There's many different other ways of creating websites, even if it's just using your own local system and stuff like that. But this is just one way of doing it. Hopefully you guys kind of have been able to follow along. And if you have any questions or any problems that you ran into during the technical demonstration, please feel free to ask your questions now, because this is pretty much all we wanted to cover today. And we've saved the last couple minutes for helping you guys troubleshoot or answer any other questions. And if you don't have any questions, thank you guys so very much for coming out and visiting our workshop. We don't really have any other content to cover, so you can take your leave a little bit early if you'd like. But yeah, just opening the floor to any questions, comments, concerns, stuff like that.
I think I converted to Vim throughout this workshop.
Yes, Vim is very powerful, except for when you only have VI.
I've been using, I'm like kind of a hybrid between Nano and Vim. Like I kind of know like the essentials to get around and actually do like a little bit extra than the essentials. But for some reason, I got into Vim customization. So that was the thing that made me lean the other way.
You just want to add another dot file to your GitHub repo?
Yeah, I don't have a dot file stuff yet, but maybe.
That's how you know someone's a true Linux aficionado. It's when their GitHub has the dot files, so that on any Linux environment, they can just install it, have their environment profile set up. Yeah, for those of you who don't know what dot files are, if we go to our home directory and I do ls-tac A is going to list all files, even if they're hidden. You can see that there's a number of directories and files that start with a dot, which means that they're hidden. And these are or can be used for profile configurations. For example, bash rc. This is a bash profile. You can also have another one or other bash profiles, or I should say shell profiles like the VSH and stuff like that. You could have a file called .vim profile. This will allow you to configure how your Vim interacts and looks like. Different softwares have different dot files, but collectively, the configuration files are called dot files. And as I kind of was talking about earlier, people who use Linux a lot tend to have their own custom profiles for things. So they will upload their profiles to their like GitHub, for example. And if they're on a new environment, they can just download their profiles. So whenever they use those same tools anywhere, it'll be the same experience. So that's just another thing that you could consider doing if you're interested.
Yeah, it's a little confusing at first, and it's like lots of stuff that you don't really want to touch because you could like break stuff. But then once you get the hang of it, it's like super worth it. Makes you feel like you love Linux.
Yeah. It's definitely really, really nice. Yeah. And for those of you who are still around, originally we were going to also cover how to like set up a Minecraft server. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like there was enough time today for that. On the bright side, though, I highly recommend you all to try it yourself if you are able to, because it's just good practice, setting up different kinds of servers. My personal challenge to you would just be to try using Google Cloud. It actually comes with $300 worth of free credits or 3 months, whichever one expires first, for every Google account you have. And you can create as many Google accounts as you want. So that's technically infinite credits. But you can use that, create a cloud VM, set up your Minecraft server from there, see if you can configure your cloud VM to allow you to SSH from your local computer. By default, it won't. So that's something you can kind of mess around with Linux, trying to get used to setting up SSH and stuff like that, messing around with it. Obviously, if you're going to take that challenge and you need help, feel free to ask any of us on Swift eBoard, or Justin and I, particularly if you're so inclined. But yeah, it's a really nice challenge. It's pretty simple, and because the only quote unquote server part you have is the Minecraft server, and there's plenty of documentation on how to get that running. It's just so much, or more so, the challenge would be to get yourself allowed to SSH from your host computer. And if you're using a Windows computer, you may not have SSH functionality by default. So I highly recommend you install or just mess around with PuTTY, which allows you to interact with SSH servers from a Windows computer. There's like portable versions. So that basically just means ones that you can use that are not a full program. It's just an executable .exe. So if you're worried about installing PuTTY or whatnot, you could just use the portable version. Yes.
All right, I think that's it. I'm gonna stop the recording.